I'm not a science denier, and I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist myself, but I'm fascinated by them. I watch the Y Files on YouTube obsessively. I've been down the rabbit hole with flat Earth, the hollow moon, the staged moon landing, the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, you name it. I love the stories, and I'm fascinated by the psychology involved. Thus, I'm super excited to talk today with my guest, Lee McIntyre, author of How to Talk to a Science Denier. I have so many questions. Lee is a research fellow at the Center of Philosophy and History of Science at Boston University. He's a senior advisor for public trust in science at the Aspen Institute, and now a life member at the Clare Hall University of Cambridge. Please welcome Lee McIntyre. Lee, thanks for being in our Fresh Face and Health
Thank you
today.
so much.
So, what I love about your conclusion in the book is that at the end of the day, you see beyond all the noise, beyond the craziness and the trauma and the paranoia and the aggression. And your final conclusion is empathy. This is key. The world needs tolerance and understanding right now, and not divisiveness. So, no matter how far apart we are, like psychologically,
Mhm.
logically, in our belief systems or anything, I think this is so important, and I'm excited to build to that. But before we get into this understanding and forgiving and accepting, we got to talk about some of the conspiracies and science denial that's out there because, as I said in the opening, they're fascinating, and the stories are great. And frankly, I can see the appeal of them oftentimes. So let's talk right off the bat about flurfers. Let's talk about flat Earth
Okay.
conspiracies. Let's walk us through this.
So first thing I got to do is challenge you because you said you're not a science denier, you're not a conspiracy theorist, but you've been down the rabbit hole. That's what they say. So I'm gonna, but I know your interest is professional in it, just like mine. And so, I
I
mean,
know, but see, I bring up the
but
Wi-Fi owls because what he does is he
yeah,
tells
I
these
know.
stories, and you're like, "Yeah,
See,
I'm buying it," and then he debunks them
see,
at the
this
end,
this is
which is
this is
like,
what happened to me. I'm a philosopher of science. So, and I write about science denial. And so the reason I got interested in the flat earthers is because these are kind of the worst of the worst, as science deniers go. I mean, please. But as I started to read what they said and hear what they said, it was kind of interesting. And I decided to go to their convention. And so I went to their convention in the fall of 2018 uh, in Colorado and spent 48 hours there. So I know exactly what you mean, right? It doesn't mean that you're buying into it. It means that you're interested in the phenomena and how it is that somebody gets to the point where they honestly believe that the earth is flat. And that's the first thing that people have to understand. These people are serious. They're not goofing around. They're not just playing for media. They're just not trying to get the likes. They actually believe it. And so, what do you wanna know?
well, let's talk about those beliefs. The Earth is flat. The sun and moon are local, and they're equidistant from this flat
Yeah.
disk that is. I don't.
So they so they
How do you explain
so
it?
they so they think that the Earth is flat, that the sun, moon, and stars are very close, and in fact, this is why we've never been to the moon, is because there's a dome, over the Earth, kinda like a snow globe or like a terrarium, and the sun, moon, and stars are just outside that. Now, dig down. Why do they believe this? They believe it. Oh, and I forgot, very important thing. Doesn't exist. Antarctica is not a
Right,
continent.
it's an
It's
ice
an
wall
ice
that
wall
surrounds the
surrounding the perimeter,
perimeter of the
so the
disk.
water doesn't fall off. Now, how could anybody believe this? And the reason they believe it is that they are conspiracy theorists, and they will proudly say that they're conspiracy theorists. In fact, I heard people at the convention say, "What are your top 20 conspiracy theories?" And, they could rattle off what they were. And so it's all about it's easy to get lost in the
Identity.
content of what they believe. For me as a philosopher, the really interesting thing was how my fellow human beings got to the point where they mistrusted their eyes, where they mistrusted scientists, where they mistrusted teachers and airline pilots and all these other people, to think that they were in league with the devil, keeping the truth about the shape of the earth.
But you say they don't trust their eyes, but see, they always seem to fall back on this idea of like, it's common sense. I look out the plane window and I don't see the
Yeah.
curvature of the earth, and that water looks flat to me. So they think they're using this common sense. I don't know, was it Aristophanes? I don't know. It was some Greek, and it was like 1500 BC who did the experiment with the stick where he'd move the stick and
It
trace the shadow and prove the
it's
circumference of the
it
global Earth within like
yeah.
a kilometer or something.
I don't remember, was that Aristarchus? I don't remember who that was, but yeah, I mean, there
I
are
don't either.
experiments you can do, and here's a really important point. Most of the flat earthers are experimentalists. When I say they don't believe their eyes or their senses, you go out on a starry night, you look up, you might think the earth is flat. You drive in, North Dakota, you might think the earth is flat. I know somebody from North Dakota, he said it's the kind of state where you can watch your dog run away for 3 days. I mean, it's flat, right? Um, but it doesn't take that much to start doing experiments and to figure out that it's not flat. There, a simple one is once ships were around, you can watch a ship disappear over the horizon, like watching your dog run away. You can watch that ship disappear over the horizon, hull down. Why does the hull disappear first when a ship goes over the horizon? It's because the Earth is not flat. That's an easy one. But there are other experiments like that where, if
Yeah, you can look across Lake Michigan at Chicago, and you're not seeing the first 4 or 5 stories of
That's
the buildings, and
that's right. So I mean, and the flat earthers will do those experiments. The problem is that they're it's not so much that they're not believing what they see, it's that they're not reasoning about it in the right way, because sometimes they do experiments that don't come out the way that they think that they should come out. They do an experiment which refutes them, and they go, "Oh, well, forget that one, we'll do another one." That's the real problem.
so I believe the distance of the I'm trying to remember if the dome is supposed to be like 300 miles, above the Earth, and that the sun and moon are the same size, and that they're local, and, like, over and over. I don't know why I'm so fascinated by it, but it's all over my timeline because I will
Yeah,
go in. I don't try to argue personally with the people, but what I do is I actually learn a lot of science
yeah,
that way, because what happens is, like, smart scientific people will come on and prove in terms that are just, like, irrefutable that I can't even
yeah.
do, and so I learn stuff by tracking flat earthers, and I don't understand where the word "flurfer" comes from.
Never
I don't
heard
know where
that
the
one
F
before.
comes from.
You just said it. It is a very it's an interesting way to learn about time zones, eclipses, um, all the things that we don't necessarily understand unless we took astronomy. Um, and actually, I have a friend who's a physicist, and he got so fascinated with flat earthers that he built a computer model of what they believed. Now, he didn't build a computer model of the sun, moon, stars, earth, solar system. He built a computer model of what they said was true. And you walk in to this computer model and you look up and you don't see what they said you would see. That's an issue. So I mean, so there are people who take this seriously. And the interesting part is you talk to a flat earther, they've read a lot of physics. They've usually, I mean, if you start to talk to them about Galileo or Newton or Aristotle or Aristarchus, I mean, they know, well, that experiment was fake. Well, here's why, that's not the case. They'll come up with things like they don't believe any photo from NASA is fake. And you say, why? Well, and then they'll maybe say something like, "Well, that famous image, I've actually got it right here, it goes on my desk, of the Earth from space." And they say, "Well, where are the stars?" You go, "Oh, where are the stars?
It turns
Where are
out
the
the
stars?"
sun's pretty
Yeah,
bright.
I mean, geez, I don't know, can you see the stars during the daytime? No. Well, it's daytime on the moon. Can you see the stars? No. Why is that such a big shock? But I mean, that becomes part of a conspiracy for them. It's all
Yeah, well, I heard one the other day. I saw a guy post His argument was, well, if the moon is so bright and it's just so white in the sky, why doesn't it cast light on the earth? Like,
It
it
does.
does. It's called moonlight. Like, I mean, so a lot of this is actually just it's kind of like Dunning-Kruger or something. It's actually kind of just wrapped up in identity. This insistence on maybe what is it, like being a contrarian? Like, I mean, you can present the
Yeah.
knowledge, but the more you present, the more you're just buying into, you're buying
Yeah.
the conspiracy, not
The
them.
if
They're using common sense, so they sort of
Yeah,
turn the
I'm not the denier, you're the denier, that sort of thing, or I'm the scientist, you're not. Um, when you attack someone's beliefs, you're attacking their identity. Now, that's not true for scientists, shouldn't be true for scientists, they're supposed to change their mind on the basis of evidence. But if you
But it's interesting you say
Yeah.
that because I interview a lot of big science people and they like to, whether it's archaeologists or
Mhm.
astrophysicists, they are really don't even wanna be curious. They're like, "This is what
This
we
is what we
know."
know, yeah.
Yeah, so but go
But
on.
but but see, in science, there's an agreed upon method to settle those kind of disputes. You look at the evidence and you design experiments and you see. And then if someone won't change their mind when evidence comes forward to show that what they believe is false, then they're sort of being read out of the profession. I mean, they just can't help it. That's what science is about. But to start out knowing what you think is true and then try to gather the evidence to show that it's true, that's not science, that's cherry picking, right? That's confirmation bias. And so
Yeah, and we do see that in
you
science
do,
sometimes, but then it gets
you
debunked. It
do.
doesn't stand up to
Well,
critical
because
review.
scientists are very critical of one another's work. Look, you see cops do that all the time when they're trying to chase down uh, um, who committed the crime. Once they have a suspect, they don't continue looking at other suspects. They look for evidence to show that the suspect they've got is guilty. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
that's
because they
called
just wanna
confirmation
close the case
bias.
so they can get the politicos off
And
their back. Yeah,
you can make
they
a
just wanna make their life
mistake that
easier.
way. Um, and so there is the problem that I had with the flat earthers, the reason I found them fascinating enough to go hear them, is that I wanted to know not just what they believed, but why they believed it. Because I thought that if I could understand that, then I could talk to other science deniers, the people who are actually causing problems in the world. I don't think the flat earthers are hurting
RFK.
anybody, but RFK is hurting somebody, and the climate deniers
Right,
are
and
hurting
these are the
somebody.
same people that are going to they're already susceptible to
Yes,
this belief
that's
system,
right.
so it's
That's right,
relevant.
and ask yourself, why is RFK Jr. susceptible? I have my own theory on this.
Well, we've heard about I wanna hear your theory, but there's the brain worm, there's the I don't know, it could be the trauma of being a Kennedy.
Trauma, you're correct. Um, every single person that I interviewed, every person, at the FEIC convention explained to me that there was some life-altering event when the scales were removed from their eyes and they realized that they couldn't trust other people. And it was a traumatic event like 9/11 or, some sort of physical violence against them or, something. I mean, they had some sort of a terrible, horrible thing happen. Different, some people it was health related, different events for different people. And after that event, they were never the same. And they were
It's interesting to me
susceptible.
that they were so forthcoming about
But
that,
yeah,
though.
but I
Like, that
mean,
they were
but
so
they
forthcoming about the
well,
personal
because it was the moment, it was the Matrix moment, it was the red pill moment, right? It was and RFK Jr., gee, you don't have to scratch that hard to figure out what the trauma was in his life that made him not trust people. Now, can you other members of his family have the same trauma and didn't, go down the rabbit hole he did? But if the untold story about science denial is, and I don't know if there's psychological work on this, but I hope there is that it is a study of trauma. And that's why identity is at stake, I think, because if you're saying, "No, you're stupid," or "No, you should be trusting these other people," or "No, you're wrong," you're attacking vulnerable people who already yeah, I mean, they already feel vulnerable. And, that's why that's why they're so, happy to be at a convention with like-minded people, because it's a joyful thing to be surrounded by people who agree with you. And then here I show up
Yeah,
and
if you
question it.
question the belief system, it actually triggers them,
Oh,
which
yes.
that's how trauma
Oh,
works. Trauma is all
that's
about
right.
triggers. Now, I am of the mind, see, I kinda wanna believe. We'll go into
You
Bigfoot a
wanna
little bit later
believe.
because everyone is well, like Fox
Yeah,
Mulder,
that's
I
what I was
just
gonna say.
because if these possibilities outside of what we think we
Yeah,
know are you know
yeah.
what I mean? It just sort of opens up it just makes the universe more wondrous. But at the same time, I'm a skeptic and I believe in science, but, like, I find this is again, this is why I like the Y-Files because I get hooked into the story right away, and he tells the story that the little guy with his goldfish is telling the story about the Anunnaki and ancient alien civilizations and stuff, and I'm like, "Yeah, it's kinda compelling. At least it has a logic better than flat Earth, right? They're putting
Yeah.
A, B, and C together. It's their own logic, whether or not it's full of holes." And I'm kinda like, I wanna believe it because it's a great story, and then at the end, he kinda debunks it, and he's like, "It's a great story, but is it true?" And then he goes back through and sort
Yeah.
of reverse
Good, good,
engineers
good.
logic into it. So it's very well rounded. It doesn't just go down the rabbit hole, you
That
know what I
that
mean? And
that's
it kinda
good.
it kinda yeah, because it gets you with that gotcha. I mean, I think it's
Yeah,
actually a probably a
yeah.
pretty good thing for a science denier to watch. But when you're surrounded by these people, when you immerse yourself in this flat earth community, that's one of the harder ones. The moon landing's a little easier to swallow for me
Mm.
because there are some things about the moon landing that are kind of fascinating. I mean, we haven't been back. There's the Van Allen radiation belt. There's the fact that all the data that was in the lunar module and everything that launched that thing could now fit on a cell phone. And there's things that you can at least, and some of the photos do look. I mean, NASA has like blurred over certain things. Just maybe that's a just an effect of the the photograph itself. Maybe that's an in-camera thing, but there's enough there. Flat Earth is just like I whatever. I
Well,
don't even know where this starts, but
the human brain is a
the question is when you
yeah,
surround yourself with these people and you're
yes.
immersed in it, do you ever find yourself persuaded at all?
Um,
That's gonna
I
be hard
don't
with flat Earth, but say
I
moon
gotta
landing.
say well, but there also gets a moon landing. I gotta say no in that kind of a venue, but I think what you're asking is any human being susceptible at a certain level? And the answer is yes, because we get most of our scientific information not because we go out and perform an experiment, but because we trust the people who are giving it to us. And so, if you have a neighbor, say, who had a vaccine injury, which is a real thing that can happen, that's much more compelling to you than, whatever maybe your doctor's going to say. You're at least going to want to get to the bottom of it. You're going to try to figure it out. And look, sometimes there are actual conspiracies. Sometimes there are actual correlations. The problem with a conspiracy theory is that, as I said, the brain is a pattern seeking tool, which, thank God that it is. But there's that moment of truth with a conspiracy theory where you say to them, yes, but what about? And then there's something that they shouldn't be able to explain. And they go, yes, but that just shows you how good the conspirators are. That they could cover that up. That's the real test of it, not does something adhere, and then it's up to the skeptical inquirer or the scientist or somebody to take it seriously enough to debunk it, as the people do on the Wi-Fi. I've never seen that program, but it sounds interesting. But it's that moment when you say, "Yes, but what about?" And then they go, "Well, that's and they were they could cover it up because, they were in political power at the time," or, something like that.
So, the granddaddy of the 2 it's different with each. We're kinda using flat Earth, and we'll use the moon landing. With flat Earth, like, the first big granddaddy question is, like, for me, is, like, why? I mean, how does NASA how do they benefit from convincing us that the earth is flat, unless it's just wrapped up in some sort of Judeo-Christian, we're unique in the universe sort of ethos. Like, what benefit What benefit to NASA? Why would it be so important for hundreds of thousands of scientific
Yeah.
minds to conspire to convince us we don't live on a globe?
I'm not sure I can answer that. As much time as I spent with them, I heard different answers, or usually having to do some of them are secular and some of them are theistic, just as, in any other society. The one answer that came through the most was that it was, the devil, that it was that the people were being rewarded by the devil because the people who were in on the conspiracy were successful people. They were people who had political power or stature, or they made money somehow, by, keeping other people down. But I
Now, the
can't
moon landing
explain it.
makes sense. Like, why would we fake the moon landing? That one's pretty obvious because, JFK made a promise, let's get to the
I
moon
mean,
by
he
the end
had
of
to
the
do it.
decade. We get there in July of 1969. We had to do it. The Cold War, Russia was ahead of us. So, like, that one is a little easier to get traction for me. Like, I get, immersed in these, moon landing deniers, and I'm kinda like, "Well, it's kinda compelling." But then I've debunked them one by one, the shadows, well,
Right.
why is there 2 shadows here?
The
What is the light
reflection in
source?
the
What
space
camera is shooting
helmet,
that?
yeah, all that.
Right, but at least there's and then Kubrick's great
Hey,
work, and the great
and
special
Paul
effect.
McCartney died in 1966 too. Hey, just look at the album covers.
But see that the moon at least the moon landing has a reason, like, I just can't think of a good reason why would what is the advantage to a flat Earth? I
I
just
can
for the
I
life of me,
cannot, but I'll tell you the corollary. I cannot think of an advantage to somebody believing it unless they thought it was true, because they are kicked out of their churches, they lose their jobs, they lose touch with their family. I mean, they genuinely believe it's true. What they will say, I believe it because it's the truth. Now, you're asking a different question, which is why would the people who are behind the conspiracy have that conspiracy? That I can't really answer.
that would me to me, that would be were I a science denier, were I a conspiracy
Mhm.
theorist, that would be the fundamental question. Motive, right? If we're talking about investigating a mystery, if we're gonna approach this like a scientist or a detective,
Mhm.
eventually we have to reckon the why of it, and they seem to be able to avoid that line of
Well, they
questioning.
they don't. I mean, it's been a while since I was there. I do remember asking that question, but I got such a diversity of answers. I'm not able to, um, recall all of them. But, I mean, some things they had unanimity about, but other things, they had different answers. But I don't know. I mean, because that's kind of a
Give me an example of a
po
unanimity. What's something they did have unanimity about?
that we didn't go to the moon because the crystal shell over the, would prevent us. That there's never been a flight over Antarctica because there is no Antarctica. Um, Let me see. Um, that the Earth is flat. Um, they had some theory about gravity being unreal. Never understood it. I never understood that one. But they would routine. I mean, they even had T-shirts with it. That they meant something very different by gravity than what I thought. And I went to some of their, quote unquote scientific talks, never really got to the bottom of that one. As I was fighting myself to try to remember, all of my high school and college physics, wait a minute, I remember some of this, but that's wrong. Wait, what's the matter with it? How could that be? And they'll uh again, it's the way that I'll give you a good example about how they reason about it. That's a problem. So you mentioned before about the going out in Lake Michigan and looking back at the skyline. And if you go out far enough in Lake Michigan, you notice that the bottom couple of floors of the skyline disappear. And then you go out further and then, whole buildings disappear. But the flat earther will show you a photo of the skyline of the city of Chicago from, 100 miles out or 60 miles out or something like that, where it should be gone. And they say, aha, look at this. Well, there's a scientific explanation for that.
Yeah, because they're above elevation. The photo's taken from some elevation, correct?
Well, that some photos are, but the explanation has to do with the temperature gradient difference between the temperature of the air and the temperature of the, um, water, so that what you're actually seeing is a projected image of the city of Chicago, not the actual visual. You're not looking at the city of Chicago, you're looking at an image of it. Like, when you're driving on hot pavement, it looks like there are puddles, but there are not, and it's because that pavement is super hot compared to the cold air. So, well, okay, so they offer that, and I say, "But you only see that on some days. What about the other days?" "Oh, I don't wanna talk about that." Well, wait a minute. You gotta be able to explain all the days. I mean, my theory about there being, days when the temperature difference between the water and the air is so great that you're gonna see this. You're gonna see the city of Chicago hovering above where it's supposed to be, this kind of ghost image. I can explain the days when that's gonna happen, and I can explain the days when it doesn't happen. But the flat earther can only explain the days when it does happen. How does that work? They really don't care.
They'll just call you a globetard and
Yeah,
tell you
I
that
I
you
pulled well,
drank the
I
Kool-Aid.
pulled a guy off stage one time, well, I pulled him off stage. He was coming off stage, and I asked him. I was still incognito at that point. They didn't know who I was, and I asked him a few questions, about this, and, he just basically said, "I trust the person who took this photo."
Trust is funny that
Yeah,
way, deciding on who
yeah.
you trust. Well, when I was writing West of Here, my character Craig was an amateur cryptozoologist. So, for research, I did something similar to you. I actually infiltrated BFRO, the Bigfoot Field Research Organization, and I went on one of their expeditions, and a couple of their conventions, and, it is interesting because, first of all, we showed up at the expedition, and they're like, "You can't tell anybody at the national park we're the Bigfoot
Mm.
Field Research Organization." So we all had to bring a bicycle, like a mountain bike, but, like, there was no trails for us to ride it on. It was just like it was a really bad the cover, like but anyway, um I wanna know just the I wanna know what, like and I've been to the Bigfoot symposiums, just on a cultural pop cultural level, I wanna know what the Flat Earth Symposium looks like. I mean, because 'cause I've been to a million trade
Mhm.
shows for, like, publishing and like I said, I've been to the Bigfoot thing, but, like, is there keynotes and breakout sessions? Is there a trade show where people are selling
Yeah,
merch? I
it's
mean,
the same.
paint the picture of
It's
this
the
yeah.
same. It's a ballroom at a hotel. They have, chairs, stage, speakers, a musical act, comedian, um, swag in the next room that you can buy, somebody to pump up the crowd before they have their guest speaker. It's the same. I mean, it looked like any other convention that you've ever been to. And
So that
the
oh, sorry.
staff at
Go
the
on.
hotel must have been under strict orders not to make any fun or say anything because they were, a client, but they were around too. But other than that, it was just kind of the flat earthers and me and a couple of other people who were incognito in the audience. That we didn't know who we were until
So
later.
so this comes back to and you mentioned it,
Yes.
community. Trauma groups. I just finished a novel that's
Mhm.
about, chronic
Mhm.
grievers, right? So it's about a Wednesday night
Yeah.
group that meets
Yeah.
every Wednesday, and they're all people who are, grieving. Um, that's part of the attraction, do you think? Because, I mean, if it deals with trauma, this idea of being surrounded by a supportive community.
That is the foundation for belief. Our belief, we want to believe what other people around us believe. And there's a good evolutionary reason for that. Because if you didn't, I mean, which person's going to end up on the ice floe? Which person's going to end up excommunicated from your tribal group? It's going to be the one who just kind of nobody can stand because they're always arguing with you and saying, that you're wrong and disagreeing. That's the person that you're gonna kick out. So, I mean, we as a species are community minded. I mean, we really do want to be part of this. There was an experiment in the 1950s at Swarthmore College. I mean, we're talking, you know, long time ago. And they had this very elegant experiment. I think it was Solomon Asch, and he had 20 different people sitting around in their chairs, and he was standing at or somebody was standing at the chalkboard. 19 of the 20 were what they call Confederates. 19 of them were people that were in on what was going to happen. There was only one experimental subject in there. And so the leader would draw on the board two different lines. You know, one was this long and one was this long. And the answer was, which line is longer? And you go around the table, you know, the first one's longer, the first one's longer, the first one's longer, the first one's longer. By the time you get to the 20th person, they say, yeah, the first one is longer, because it is. They saw that it was longer, and 19 people going before them had said it was. Well, about on the third go-around, the instructions for the Confederates was, now I want you to say that the short line is longer. And a very interesting thing happened. When they got to that 20th person, 33% of the time, they said that the short line was longer just to go along. Now,
That's so
did they actually
interesting.
think that the short line was longer? Did they believe it? Or were they just knuckling under? Fascinating questions.
Or were they questioning
Their
their
own
own
beliefs,
beliefs? Were they
right?
like,
I must be the one who's
right,
crazy.
maybe,
But I mean, people
but it shows that they wanted to fit in.
well, they do. I mean, belief, if you defy the belief structure of your community, there are consequences. I mean, during COVID, there were people in red states who put on disguises to go over to the next town and get a COVID vaccine because they didn't want to be ostracized in their own community being seen getting a COVID vaccine. I mean, people do not like to be, now that's somebody who understood, you know, that the COVID vaccines could be helpful. But I mean, how far of a step is it from, I'm just going along because I don't want to be ostracized or it's not worth it to me, versus, nah, I really believe it. Say you're an anti-vaxxer, or say you're vaccine hesitant. You might get on a Facebook group. You might talk to other people and begin to learn things, and you think, wow, I didn't know any of this. This is, you know, just fascinating to me. Next thing you know, there's a convention, and that's where they draw you in. So, I mean, yes, it is very hard, which is now, how do you get people out of this? How do you talk to them? Um, I think it can be done, but it's not just giving them facts. It's changing their community.
You have to, first you have to earn
You do,
trust.
and you earn trust face to face. You don't earn trust in the comments section of an article online. You don't earn trust by
I was
screaming
saying
at
the exact
somebody.
same thing. Yeah. I was saying the exact same thing a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about MAGA.
Yeah.
Like, I was
Yes.
explaining how I get on these groups and I can't communicate, but if I run into them at the Port Angeles
Yes.
fairgrounds and they're looking me in the eye, all of a sudden you can have a civil dialogue, and
Yes,
this
I
is
had civil dialogue with every single person that I met at the Flat Earth, even once they knew who I was. I'll bring up an example here for you talking about MAGA. Marjorie Taylor Greene. She very recently has given up a number of her conspiracy theory-based beliefs, and people were you know, the media, they were still pushing her on, "Oh, so you no longer think that there's a Jewish space laser, ha, ha, ha. Oh, so you no longer think this." I don't know if anybody's asked her about 2020, but I mean, they're pushing her, pushing her, pushing her, you know, making fun of her is really what they're doing. And she finally got pissed and she said, "Look, I'm a victim. I was lied to. So, you know, stop this." And you know what? She's right. She was a victim. She was right that she was being lied to, but she was being lied to by somebody that, you know, she didn't know was lying to her. I wrote a new book after the one that you've read, the one that we're talking about now, called On Disinformation, where I make the argument that there are people who profit by having deniers, by having, you know, an army of people who believe false things about science, about government, about, to believe conspiracy theories about climate change and vaccines. There are people who make money on this or gain political power, and they create and spread disinformation to try to get them to, to get that to hook in. And so that's why I think you don't talk to somebody who believes that sort of thing in a hostile way. For one, I don't think it's right. Ano
You get their hackles up,
It's not
and
gonna
where do you go from
work.
there? There's only one place
It
to
makes
go.
me I don't like
Yeah.
to treat people that way. It doesn't work. And the only way you can ever convince somebody is face to face as a human being to say things like, "But why do you believe that?" To have a real to be curious about why they believe what they believe. This has been shown experimentally. There are methods by which you can turn somebody, but it has to be done in the right way.
Well, and it starts with
Yes.
listening and empathy, and, it's why the state of our political dialogue in this country has devolved so far is because it has become so impersonal through social networking and forums and things like
Yeah.
that because people have proven time and again. I always go back to the 70s and 80s. I didn't know if my neighbors were Republicans or
Yeah.
Democrats or like this idea of identity has been so bolstered by the online identity, which is in itself sort of ironic because an online identity allows you to curate who you are.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You can choose a picture of somebody who's not even
Yep.
you. You
Yep.
can present yourself in a different way. This is what happens with it's rampant on the dating apps and so forth. So you need patience, and you're clearly a very patient person. But how do you decide? And did you even ever run into this? How do you decide when to disengage? At what point does the dialogue, say about flat Earth, about hollow moon, about vaxing, about climate denial, when does that dialogue become futile?
Usually the person disengages with me. I very rarely disengage with the person. If they ever say something that is just straight up an insult, usually the first time I just kinda take the insult and don't react, because that's a little disarming, right? 'Cause they meet you with anger and they expect to be met back with anger, and when you don't do it, it's kinda like, "Whoa, what's going on here?" But if that continues, then I'll walk away.
You said something, you kind of answered this question a little bit, but like there's other facets to it, which is how do conspiratorial communities evolve into these larger scale political movements? And is there a connection between science denial and a broader political and cultural polarization?
Yes.
I mean, on the surface, there seems to
Yes,
be,
it's the
but yes,
blueprint.
please.
It's the blueprint. I mean, science denial has been around since the night. Well, it's been around since science, but I mean, modern science denial, where it's amplified through media, has been around since the 1950s when the cigarette companies first got together to try to figure out how to undercut the science, which was going to show that cigarette smoking caused lung cancer. But that pathway,
It's just so hard for me to believe that people didn't get talk about common
well,
sense. I wonder why I'm hacking up
But
blood all the
but
time, eh?
they created the blueprint that the climate deniers then followed, the oil companies, and ever since, and I think that what happened is that one day, the political people saw that and said, "Damn, they're denying facts. Let's do that." Let's not and they don't have to be scientific facts, they can be any sort of facts about path of a hurricane, what's happening with inflation, what's didn't Trump recently, he fired somebody because he didn't like the labor statistics that were coming out, So, I mean, you just deny the facts and move on. I mean, that's the model, that's the blueprint. Um, and the trouble is that that leads to doom in a democracy, because if you once you're not based on facts anymore, once you can't have respectful dialogue, in an environment in which you agree on the facts, but you have different values and you try to come up with policy, I don't know if democracy can last.
Yeah, well, try to take me inside the mind of somebody, where this guy is getting up in the Oval Office and saying, "Costs are down, everything's cheaper." So, this is
Well, here
undeniable. Like, you go to
these
the
are not the
grocery store,
droids you're
remember when
looking
eggs were
for,
like eight
you know?
ninety? Yeah, so what is the psychology of the person that's hearing that message, but they're so bent on, like, I'm all in on this no matter what
Which
I'm
line is
presented
shorter,
with.
this one or this one? It's the same.
Right, but in this case,
Oh,
only
no.
one guy
Oh,
is
no, no.
saying,
It's the same. Imagine if you had a community of people doing that. I mean, it's the same. Look, the first time I this is there's no science behind this, but it was just intriguing. The percentage in the Ash experiment of people who were willing to say that the longer line was short and the shorter line was longer was 33%. That's about what Trump's base is of the American population, 33%. I think there are people who are willing to go along with trashing facts as long as their leader tells them what to do.
and it's for whatever reason what they wanna hear
Well,
or
it's
something
team building.
underlying
I mean,
that.
the content the content of the message doesn't matter so much as that the leader said so. I mean,
God, it's
that's the
interesting.
point, right? Trump, I mean, now he's completely changed his mind about whether they should release the Epstein files. Now he's making it sound like, it was his idea to do so. But because he's losing the ability, maybe we'll see if this the end, I doubt it. But, to have his influence over the Republican Party. But I mean, what once you've it's insidious because once you lie to people, they don't just believe one untruth. They start to question truth itself, and they start to question they lose trust in the truth tellers. And then who do they turn to? The original person who told them the untruth. And then that person can kind of say whatever they want. And then you can manipulate them, and then you've got autocracy. It's a famous quotation from Hannah Arendt, the great, political philosopher and Holocaust historian that goes roughly like that, "With such a people," she says, "you can then do what you choose." Once they stop questioning, once they just start saying, "Oh, what does the team believe? What's the memo of the day? Oh, we're supposed to say, oh, inflation, I see inflation's down. Okay." And they go along with it to be with the team.
Most of this seems to be crowded on one side of the political spectrum, the far right. But there is such a thing as liberal science denial, no? Can you unpack some of
Yeah.
the liberal science denying theories?
Yeah, it's not equal. So I just wanna make sure that people don't, get confused about that because there's so much pressure in the media to say, "Oh, but don't they do it on both sides?" So, a pox on both of their houses. One of the theories that I examined in the book was, and this was fascinating to me, is that anti-vax used to be equally split between conservatives and liberals. Now, it was for different reasons. Why did you find liberal people who were anti-vax? Well, it was because they didn't trust big pharma, whereas the conservative anti-vaxxers tend to be because they didn't trust the government, the FDA, etc. Now, after Trump, that has polarized politically too, and so you now see more anti-vax on the right than the left. In fact, they went back to some of the communities. There was a famous article from the New York Times where they went back to one of the I forget the name it's on the tip of my tongue, the name of the place in California, but it was this haven for liberal you know uh, uh, um, conspirituality they call it. And they thought
I
that
like it.
there were awful lot of people didn't vaccinate their kids. They came back after Trump. No, not anymore. Why? Because they didn't want people to confuse them with being Trumpers. Yeah, ouch, community. There's another, great example of liberal science denial, and it involves GMOs. And I had a chapter on this in the book. Um, Most of the pushback, at least in the United States, against GMOs comes from the left. Organizations, there are, I don't want to name them on air, but there are, but I did say his name in the book so people can look. There are organizations which are uh, pushing back against the idea that you know, genetically modified foods are safe. And there has never been any scientific study which has shown that GMOs are a harm to human health. Now, sometimes the farming practices in which they're raising GMOs where they use way too much fertilizer, that's dangerous. But
Yeah,
the
chemical,
GMO
pestilent.
itself,
uh,
if you can tease that apart, maybe you can't. But the point is, are the GMOs themselves dangerous? The GMO organisms? No study has ever shown it. I can't say they're not because you can't, prove a negative, but there was only really one study which purported to show that they were, and it was methodologically flawed. But you see just a host of people um, who say that it is dangerous. Go to Whole Foods and try to find a GMO product. Now, they're there. I mean, their customer base overwhelmingly liberal. Uh, they do have GMO products, but that's always struck me as a kind of an interesting example of of potential liberal science denial.
I'm susceptible to that one. So when we talk about GMOs, is that almost any non-organic?
Organic and GMO are not the same. GMO is something that's genetically modified. Corn, tomatoes, wheat. Um, those are the kind of there are a couple of other big ones. I mean, in some cases, you know, uh, virtually all of the foods that you eat within a category, I think it's corn, were genetically modified at some time. The blight, would have taken them away. But I mean, people
That's where the
in the
corollary is for me, like, because
bananas.
they tried to make everything bigger, more
Yeah. Yeah, you get
resistant.
these great big store tomatoes and they're tasteless, right? But they're not gonna kill you. They're not dangerous. There is nutritional value to them. And here's my concern. Um, and I wrote about this in the book at greater length. There Famine is a real problem in the world. And famine doesn't just kill you through starvation, but famine can cause uh, um, uh, defects like low vitamin A can cause a certain kind of blindness. I forget which one it's called, but it's a big problem in the world. And there's an invention. The researchers came up with something called golden rice, which was rice infused with crossed with a daffodil of all things, turned it golden in color, and is infused with vitamin A. And so, if you gave the GMO rice, and I mean, what percentage of the world gets half its calories every day from rice? I mean, half the world, maybe. If golden rice were a thing, you could wipe out blindness based on vitamin deficiency. But there are
Yeah,
organizations
they put a lot of so
that
this is
push
interesting
back.
because,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm susceptible to that too. Like, I
Why
I
is
am
it
I am
gold?
suspicious of genetically
Yeah.
altered, but you're right, it does be I mean, they can, you can infuse something with vitamin C and you get rid of scurvy and so forth. It's that's a good pushback. That's good for me to hear. As you can see, I am a little susceptible because I
Yeah.
do have that I wanna believe
You,
outside the
you,
orthodoxy sometimes,
uh,
and it's probably an identity thing, and I've got a little bit of the contrarian in me, and
yeah.
it's sort of fun because, like, I like hot takes sometimes about whatever, sports, anything. Sometimes I like a hot take just because it's sort of fun to sort of persuade somebody, but then I notice that the more I argue for my hot take, the more my logic
Look,
sort
I
of
I
begins to fold
I
back
fell
on
for
itself.
one time.
Do
Okay,
tell.
so I was in the middle of writing How to Talk to a Science Denier, and my computer was kind of getting old and I needed to replace it, but I was hot. I mean, I was writing this book and it was the middle of things and I couldn't, afford to do anything. But then I said, God, I'm having too much trouble. So instead of replacing the computer, I got a brand new router. I got a 5G router and I put it under my desk and I hooked it up. And I had started hearing things about 5G. And I started thinking, huh, that's interesting. And I didn't have the time to stop and um, research this thing to see what it was. So it wasn't that I went down the rabbit hole. I just didn't have, I didn't want to spend the time investigating it. So, and I have it right here in the drawer. I won't pull it out and show you. But I went out and I got this titanium sleeve to put over the router so that when I wasn't, working and because it was blasting, under my desk, right at a sensitive part, right? And so I put this, titanium router condom, over the router so that when I wasn't needing to be on the internet, I could just, have it there. And my wife would come home from work and she'd say, "Ah, the Wi-Fi's down again." Oh, and I just take the sleeve off. And then one day I thought, this is ridiculous. And so I started to investigate 5G.
So why go back to why, back up. I wanna know what see, okay, what was that what was the moment?
The moment,
What was the revelation? You said you just say, "Man, this is ridiculous," because it was a hassle or something, but was there one thought? This is the
yeah.
psychology that interests me because we can you now use you as the
Yes,
test
yes, that's
subject.
right. I the moment when I realized it was ridiculous, I guess it was when I decide maybe I don't remember, maybe it was when I was having a hard day of writing and I wanted to procrastinate on something else, or I know it was my wife complaining about the the Wi-Fi going down, and she said, "You need to do something, this is ridiculous." I think that was it. And then so community, right? My beliefs were misaligned with my wife. Now, she wasn't sitting there with the 5G pointed right at her, but I'm a cancer patient. I'm a little squirrely about, you know, dangers. And I mean, I wasn't
Yeah, well, I mean, we could say this, I think, categorically about radiation. You probably don't wanna sit on a microwave that's cooking while
um, I
eh,
have been known to right after I had radiation, I don't wanna go through the X-ray. I don't wanna get any more rads than I have to, so I'll go for the pat down now. Um, which is probably ridiculous because the amount of rads you get from the machines are so low, but yeah, you don't wanna do that all the time.
less than the sunlight or
Yeah,
cloud
they'll say
break,
you'll get more
basically.
radiation on
Yeah.
the flight than you get now, and I think, but why get any at all? So, so I keep that sleeve though to remind me that anybody can fall for this. It just means
And I think that's
it just
important.
means that you have to, and I mean, once I had the time to investigate and I had trusted sources, that was important. That helped me to just say, "Well, yeah, this is ridiculous." And how embarrassing would it be to come out with a book called How to Talk to a Science but I was, having this go on. So I do for a long time, I kept that thing on my
So
desk
you're
to
bowing to the
remind me.
communal you're
Yes,
bowing to
isn't that
public opinion
interesting?
as
Yeah.
well. We're all
Now
guilty of it. It's all
that's
human
interesting,
psychology.
isn't it? That's interesting.
Yes, it
My
is.
belief was
So
also
I have
shaped
to
by the
ask you
community. That's interesting.
yes, yes, and it begs I have to ask you this as a
Yeah.
personal question. You're clearly an empathetic and, patient and tolerant person. Where do you draw the line? I'm very, I'll tell you where I draw the line, but I'm curious more to hear where you draw the line. How close can you have a person in your life who is a science denier or a conspiracy theorist? Where do you draw the line? Like, I can't be friends with this person. Is there a line?
Sometimes you can't draw a line. Sometimes they're family. And
Well, yes, but
but
even
I
then,
but
I
I
mean,
mean,
I'm
I
pretty good
get
about, cutting out a tumor.
after I okay. After I, uh, after my book came out, I started to get the most heartbreaking letters from people who had relatives who were flat earthers or anti-vaxxers or, all different stripes of science deniers who were breaking up the family and they wanted to know what to do. And my advice was always the same. My advice is keep the relationship going. Don't talk about the topic. Don't try to change their mind, show them the facts, but keep the relationship going. because if they're ever going to come back to you, that's the only way that it works. That was the most heartening thing for me in writing the book, was that hardcore science deniers do change their mind. And the way that they do it is virtually always the same. And I don't think there's ever been a study on this. This is anecdotal, but I mean, I read as many cases as I could find, and they all said, it was a scientific hypothesis that's yet to be proven or disproven, which is that the only way that somebody ever comes back is because they hear the truth from someone who they trust, who was patient, who was kind, who remained in their life. So if you cut them off, they're out there. There's no way they're going to come back. But the cases that you read
Yeah.
about of people coming back are cases where you don't break up with them. Now, sometimes for your own mental health, maybe you need to do that. Or look at the COVID example. Does did I let somebody in my home during COVID who refused to take their vaccine or to wear a mask? No, I did not. Did I know people who refused to take the vaccine and wear their mask? Yes, I did. So, I mean, I do have a line there, personal safety, but everything that you can possibly do to preserve the relationship with somebody is important. And remember that
See, now this
they
makes me
they
think.
they are curious about you too, because they think you're wrong. And they don't necessarily wanna be broken up, no matter how angry they get.
Yeah, so you said there's no scientific I think of all the parenting studies
Yeah.
they've done about, corporeal parenting versus empathetic
Yeah.
parenting, and how much more likely you are to
Yeah.
actually achieve an equilibrium or relationship with your child by being tolerant instead of being
There
authoritarian.
I think there's a hypothesis here to be tested by psychologists on science deniers specifically, but I don't think anybody's done that experiment. I have a couple of friends who are psychologists who have written a book on science denial. Maybe I'll ask them if they know of any studies or if they would do a study on this, because it's kind of a
Yeah, I do think, like,
fascinating
parenting
topic.
provides an interesting control group. Every time I go to Walmart, I think about that. You wonder why the world is a bad place, and then you go to Walmart and you see a parent that's like, "Shut up! Knock it off! Don't touch that! Get out of there!" I mean, it's just like, Jesus, if that's the only message you
Yeah.
ever get, I mean, yeah, you're not gonna be a good functional member of society. You're not gonna have healthy relationships. You're gonna have so many
Yeah.
triggers. You're gonna be a mess of neurosis and
Yeah.
trauma. Um, Geez, Lee, this has been fascinating. I appreciate your openness. Just to let's just broadcast that bigger message. If how do we change the world? And I think the answer is empathy and
Yeah.
understanding and listening. And I think we as a republic really need to hear that message right now, because everyone's like, "You're dead to me." And I know. I mean, when I ask you, where do you draw the line? I tend to draw the line when somebody else's belief system steps on somebody
Yes.
else. Do you know what I mean? As long
Yeah.
as it's not damaging, but if you say you believe this about
Yeah.
homosexuality,
Yeah.
if you say you believe this about race, that's
Yeah.
where I draw the line, because then your belief system is encroaching
It's hostile.
on the freedoms and
Yeah.
liberties, and yeah. And but other than that, I mean, I think our advice to the world should be, get out there and talk to these people in person.
I
Quit
think
being a
I
troll
think that's
online.
right.
I mean, we gotta bring that. I just want the downfall of society. My kids hate school so much that I miss the pandemic when they were all at home. They were learning plenty, but they didn't come home miserable and depressed about
Mm.
any number of things, and I feel like, when I don't know.
Why don't you
Anyway,
ask
it has
why
been,
don't you ask Marjorie Taylor Greene to come on your show?
I would love to. I would love to, because I have to be honest that I'm a little skeptical. It's heartening to see anybody within that Republican establishment sort of turning the ship, but, I mean, part of me has to wonder, is this, like, political
Yes,
opportunism, right? I
that's
mean,
what
she can
I've
seem.
wondered, and because I haven't heard her say that she's sorry for all the misery that she put the Sandy Hook people through. On the gun issue, that's a bright line for me. as is the question about the 2020 election. I'd really like to hear somebody ask her about that. But I mean, I don't think that the media do the interviews correctly for somebody like that, because she shouldn't be.
Well, because if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah,
They want the
it
answer that's
shouldn't.
gonna
She
get
shouldn't
clicks.
be ridiculed. She should be welcomed for getting as far as she has. Questioned, yes, about her motives. Some people say that this is just a political opportunism, et cetera, but then also push her on the 2020 and guns and other things. And what I'm really curious about, and I've looked and I haven't seen it anywhere in the media, how did she come to change her mind? Because if it's a genuine evolution in her psyche, if it's not political opportunism, I'm saying if she really did change her mind, I'll bet you it's because somebody that she loved and trusted, who was patient and kind, took the time with her, and that's what did it.
You hear that, America? He is Lee McIntyre. The book is How to Talk to a Science Denier. Again, Lee, thanks so much for being our fresh face in hell. This is a good example of what a fresh face in hell is all about. I mean, we're surrounded by divisiveness. We're surrounded by infighting and conflict. And here is a book that has a message that, like, if we want to have change, we have to listen to
Yeah,
each other.
I think that's true. Thank you so much for having me on. I enjoyed it. I'm intrigued by the name of your podcast, and we will see what pushback I get from that, because I do get mail.